Oh, Billy. Oh, Billy Fast Face. Billy Fast the first 3 days of every month now. And I am, let's see. I started Thursday night at 10:30. It's 10 to 7 on Sunday. Everybody always goes, when you fast, it's not fun at first, and then there's just like this euphoria that just takes over. You just feel like, oh my God, I felt amazing. But anyway, I did do yoga, and with the fasting, I did feel like, oh yeah, this feels pretty amazing. But then, of course, I always have shit to do, so the second the tape was over, I think when you fast, you're supposed to I don't know what. You're supposed to not do anything, but I don't know. I'm just doing it for vanity purposes anyways. I just don't want to be a fat. That's all. I actually ran into this guy, this pilot I knew. I didn't even recognize him. Guy had lost 80 pounds doing that intermittent fasting with protein and cut out all the carbs. He looked unbelievable. He looked like he had 0% body fat. That's pretty amazing. You know what I mean?
There's a couple things. I don't think Bill really said much of anything, right? I think he's just kind of rambling on about what he's doing with fasting and purposes and goals. But I think this is a sentiment and a perspective that a lot of people experience. They see somebody else who fasted, they lost weight. The person said it was easy. They didn't have to restrict or control or to manage or to do anything else besides just eating in this particular window. So I think psychologically it becomes quite a bit easier to do things in this way. But the problem with this overall is there's a lot of people talking about fasting in this context, and they don't let you know what the downsides are. They don't let you know what the long-term concerns are and how some of those concerns are actually directly contradictory to your overarching goal of losing body fat. And I say body fat specifically because losing weight is not necessarily the primary goal. And the reason I make this distinction is because if you are losing lean muscle tissue, when you finish your fast, on top of the effects on the hormonal profile, the effects on having a lower lean body mass can dig you into a hole where your metabolic rate gets drastically decreased, and then you are left with less food, and a lot of people tend to rebound. You see this with the Ozempic stuff as well, where about, I think, 70% of people fall off the drug at the 2-year mark, and then a year or 2 years after that, I think almost 70% of the weight is regained. And that's, so one, they likely lost lean tissue, which is why you're seeing some of the common trends of people showing their body comps after Ozempic, it's not being as good, people looking a little bit more gaunt. And then two, there's negative impacts on the hormonal profile long term. So this needs to be discussed, and I don't think Bill understands this. And with something like a 14-hour fast or 16-hour fast, with the research, it's not clear that mass amount of lean tissue will be lost if the rest of the diet is set up. So there's obviously a graded response. But when you start getting 3-day fasts and 7-day fasts and things like this, the loss in lean tissue can be significant. You can see pretty significant loss of lean tissue. And they even see this in young men. I've made a video about this where in young men, what you can see is a significant drop off in their lean muscle tissue, even after I think it was a 10-day fast. And so the 3-day fast would be on par with that. And it would have similar, I think you'd have just a little bit less of the lean tissue loss. Plus you have decrements in thyroid function, androgens, which that's been shown even in the 16-20 hour fasting context, and increases in hormones like cortisol. So yeah, you'll lose weight. If you had a lot of body fat, maybe you'll look a bit better. But I think in the long run, there's negative hormonal concerns to it. And then there's the loss of lean muscle tissue, which I think is quite problematic from a long-term health perspective, and also from a weight management perspective in the long term, and also from a metabolic perspective in the long term. And you see even prominent people who used to fast, like Dr. Peter Attia, who was doing 3-day fast, saying after, I think it was a decade, he had lost, it was somewhere between 10 to 20 pounds of lean muscle mass with his fasting, and he had to stop the fasting regimen. And so this is why I think this is the major problem with some of the fasting stuff. Now, what is the alternative? I think number one, if you set up the diet appropriately, right? You have adequate carbs, adequate protein, adequate fat. You organize your meals across the day and you look at your energy intake, you can lose weight consistently over time without massively damaging your hormones, without losing a lot of lean muscle tissue. You can actually increase your lean muscle tissue in this time frame. I have clients who have done this. I have women who are menopausal who have done this by setting up the diet appropriately. The trade-off with doing something like this versus just saying, I'm not going to eat for 3 days, is that it takes a little bit more nuance and a little bit more know-how in terms of how, of setting things up and running things on a consistent basis. So psychologically, maybe it's a little bit more difficult in the initial setup phase and only the initial setup phase. And then after that, you just maintain the diet. You shouldn't feel stressed. You shouldn't feel bad. And you lose the body fat over time. And then when you go back to you're not trying to lose weight anymore, shift your body comp, anything like this, you get into a circumstance where you're not really changing the diet that much. So you don't have to go through this fasting, this feast famine cycle. You just go back to your normal dietary intake that looks very much the same with what you are already doing currently. So these are things there's better ways to lose the weight without losing the lean muscle tissue, without trashing your hormones, and coming out on the back end and knowing how to sustainably eat and maintain the progress that you've made over the long term. I think the fasting is one of these hacks, that we get that people run. I'm going to drop my carbs super low. I'm going to fast. I'm going to skip breakfast, whatever the thing is. And psychologically, it's an easy intervention to set up, but the long-term ramifications aren't discussed. And there's way better ways to do this stuff appropriately.
Yeah, I hear this all the time that skipping breakfast is, this new thing that a friend or a family member is trying. And I listen, I keep my ears open. And like you were saying, Mike, I think people hear all the good and the ease without taking into consideration some of the risks and that there might actually be another way to do it. Jay, what were your thoughts with this video clip?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's nice to have some insight here. And this is why we want to talk about it. We have some insight into how someone who is not really health oriented or thinking in depth about health, how someone like that is thinking about fasting. And it seems to just fit into the category of other ways of restricting and using willpower to just eat less, but it's slightly easier than just eating less with each meal. You just skip a meal. And so you're, hypothetically not constantly thinking about food and wanting to eat more, although that definitely is not the case here with Bill. But yeah, the idea being this is just a way to eat less so that then you can have a better body composition. And as Mike pointed out, there's two really important things here. One is there's a direct cost to the fasting itself, where you see downregulated thyroid hormone conversion. So you see lower T3, the active thyroid hormone. And this, for, again, the non-health oriented person who might not be aware, this means that you're more prone to regaining the weight after. It means that you're going to have lower energy, because this is the main way that the main kind of driver of our energy production. It means you're going to have worse quality hair, skin, and nails. You might notice hair thinning and some brittle nails, things like that. It means you'll see lower body temperature. So that's something that you want to be concerned with, or it's a reason to maybe not go this route. You also see decreased testosterone and the reproductive hormones, sex hormones from intermittent fasting. Again, I think that one people are a little bit more familiar with the concerns there. But then also decreased muscle mass, as Mike was saying, and it's definitely more pronounced with the longer term fasts. But there are studies on intermittent fasting where they show it as well. There was a study where they did 12 weeks of weight loss diet. One group did intermittent fasting and one didn't. And this was put on by a doctor who had been recommending intermittent fasting to his patients, was just fully excited about intermittent fasting as the strategy. And he was so astounded by the results that he stopped recommending this to people, because what they found was that the intermittent fasting group lost more muscle mass and didn't lose more body fat than the other group. It was better to just have your kind of normal calorie restriction without the fasting, because of the stress induced causing more breakdown of muscle. So I think those are definitely reasons to hesitate with this kind of, even though we hear maybe some of these very occasional stories about someone losing a lot of weight with fasting and it working really well for them, there are inherent costs to it. And as you were saying, there are better options here. We can lose weight by fixing the underlying factors that are causing the weight gain in the first place, addressing blood sugar regulation, addressing our gut health, addressing our nutrient status, addressing our sleep, eating a healthy diet, and fixing our ability to utilize the food that's coming in, and lowering our stress hormones and upregulating our thyroid hormone activity, our thyroid activity. getting to a place where we're losing weight, not only without the drop in muscle mass and the low testosterone and T3, but also without constant restriction and hunger and cravings and constant willpower, and then all of the other things that we're going to see here from Bill about how he's basically obsessed with food and can't stop thinking about it because of what the diet is doing to him, how much stress it's causing, and basically just driving the signal to his body that it wants food and it wants the exact thing you're depriving it of. And instead of figuring out the reason why the types of food you're eating, the other things going on physiologically are causing it to be stored as body fat, we're just saying the food is the problem and we're taking it all out, which is not actually looking it deep enough to figure out what's going on. And so then we end up with basically just causing starvation. And there's consequences to that. One of those, in addition to the low muscle mass and testosterone and T3 and being prone to regaining weight, is also being food obsessed, as we'll hear in the next couple of clips.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't stop thinking of food. Do you know right now what I would do right now for bacon, eggs, and a coffee? Oh, God, I was making my son, I was cooking like all day today. Bacon and cooking. Getting ready for the week with the kids. I'm always, I made banana nut bread a few weeks ago. And now I just, I don't know why. So the other day I looked up how to make, this is in the middle of the fast. I'm literally watching how people make croissants in a pan au chocolat. The pan au chocolat was ridiculous. I know, this is bizarre. I've been on for 10 minutes. All I'm doing is talking about food. I have another 3.5 hours. The appreciation that you have for food when you fast is awesome. I sat for 10 minutes today and thought about how great it was that somebody came up with a breakfast burrito. And how I ended up making that was because I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to make some croissants. I mean, I'm not going to make croissants. I was just starving. And I was watching people making food like I was watching online porn. And I came across those croissants. I'd be like, oh man, homemade croissants. Can you imagine that? Those would be amazing, right?
I think this is a pretty accurate representation of what all of us have experienced on a low carb or fasting structured diet.
So I want to tell a story here about Jay and I back in college together.
You're ready.
Like, I know the story that's coming.
Jay is the master baker, especially with coconut flour. Because obviously you can't use real flour.
Oh, no.
Because real flour has carbohydrates and coconut flour is mostly fiber. So Jay and I were running like low carb, cyclical, keto dieting based on our workout regimen with intermittent fasting. It's like this, extremely anal regimen of like, you have a intermittent fasting day with really low carbs, then you have like a moderate carb day, and you have a high carb day, and it goes with your different types of training. And then what we would have is like periodically we would have refeeds, and those refeeds were usually on the weekends, and they would often include Jay baking some type of low carb recipe that was like cookies or something like this. And it's basically exactly like I remember I would just look all week long. I would be waiting till the weekend so that we could absolutely binge food. And so Jay had made these coconut cookies, and I think we ate the coconut. What we would do, we had another roommate with us. We would sit on the couch. We ate the coconut flour cookies. Obviously, like ate way too many of them and got like 50 grams of fiber in one sitting from coconut flour. Felt terrible after, but still proceeded to eat a 5-pound bag of blueberries between the three of us and like paint our faces blue, just like shoveling in blueberries because we hadn't eaten enough carbohydrates and things like this all week long while we were still training and biking and doing all this activity. And this was the thing, is like every day we wake up and just want food, and we just crave food, and like we could only have this amount of carb on this particular training day, and then it would lead to this binging cycle. And then on the weekends we would binge, right? So that for me, that was after a year of doing hardcore intermittent fasting on a 16-8 regimen with like less than 50 grams of carbs per day, extremely strict. Started to loosen up on some of the carbs a bit because I had, couldn't sleep, had serious problems with this. But when we got into like on both settings, like always thinking about food, always hungry, and And then when we went into that regimen, it just like, that was into year like two and a half, something like this. That was like just all the time, constantly thinking about food. Now, when we then switched into a more pro-metabolic bioenergetic perspective, which essentially was just adding carbs back in to a large extent, I remember like all of those cravings went away. Like there wasn't this food obsession. There wasn't this craving anymore, the sugar addiction. Because at that point in time is like, do you think the bacteria in our guts are just making us crave sugars? Like there's like these types of thought processes were going around. And then like, or sugar's addictive, it's a drug, stuff like this. And we added carbs back in, and it was like in the form of fruits, plantains at that point are still doing starches, rice, things like this. And I remember the cravings just gone. Now it's just like I eat. I don't really have cravings for anything. I could see cookies or cakes or whatever else, and it's not this circumstance. Like I really want to have that. Like I actually don't have the desire to have that. And yeah, it was a huge shift. That was like one of the big things that was extremely freeing once we got off that regimen. It's like this constant battle, having to restrict and avoid all these things, and like having like tons and tons of cravings, and telling myself I'm a sugar addict. And then like running gut protocols because it's the microbiome and things like this. So it was it was really great to get off of that, and it lines up with Bill's experience, and I think it lines up with the hormones. When you look in the studies, when people are put under stress, they actually tend their taste for sugar becomes less pronounced, in the sense that they will have to have more sugar, more sweet things to actually like have the reward signaled. And you see when people are under stress, cortisol increases their desire to eat these energy-rich, sweet foods. Because I think that was something that a lot of people experience when they go on the low-carb stuff. Over time, you really start to get these heavy cravings for carbohydrate. And I think part of that goes with some of the hormonal adjustments, and especially with the fasting and whatnot, on top of the restricting psychology that goes with these different diets. And then once you get out of it, I see this with clients all the time. They're like, it's kind of weird. I didn't think that this would ever happen, but I don't crave carbs anymore. Like I have my fruit and maybe rice or potatoes with my meal, and then maybe I have some dark chocolate, mac nuts, things like this. And like I look at cake now, I look at cookies, I look at sweets, I look at these other things, and I just don't want it. I don't really care. I'm kind of indifferent about it. And it's because you already met the need. And it's not an addiction. That's the important thing. This is not an addiction. This is your body telling you what it needs to function optimally, not essentially, optimally.
Thank you for that distinction.
Yeah.
Jay, I didn't know you were a baker. I'm assuming that your tastes have shifted over the years.
Away from coconut flour cookies?
Yes.
Yes, I don't bake coconut flour cookies anymore.
But when you think back to that time and having a similar experience, at what point did you, and I'm assuming you decided together, it seemed like you had a unique bond at the time, but when did you finally start listening to your body and that constant draw and pull towards food?
Yeah, I mean, it was, we were both doing our experimentation together, kind of fueled each other, which was a good thing, because before we even came across Ray's work, which was really the turning point, Mike was really the driver behind. I might have done the baking, but Mike planted the seed. He would encourage it. He bought the the frozen fruit, and as we very slowly started adding carbs in, Mike would be the one to be like, banana chips are mostly fat, and it wouldn't, and instead of having a couple or a handful, we would finish a whole bag easily. And so we started to bring those carbs in. And again, we had come from like really intense low carb and intermittent fasting. And I'm glad that Mike was there to slowly help us introduce the carbs in, and, kind of give into that intuition and craving and desire, a little bit more, because it definitely helped propel that process forward. But then, of course, when we came across Ray's work, it really changed our perspective entirely and allowed us to recognize that these weren't things that we had to fight against and we're just giving into, right? It wasn't the situation where we were wrong for not having the willpower to just keep forcing it, but rather every single cell in our bodies was telling us to eat carbohydrates and get that fuel in because we needed it. And so that allowed us a lot of freedom to get enough food in, kind of go through a bit of a refeeding period where we were eating a ton of carbohydrates. And, initially it's not like the carb cravings went away right away. And I want to point that out, for anyone who's coming from low carb, I don't want them to think they're going to have a day where they eat 150, 200 grams of carbs or even 300 or more, and they're going to be fine. It takes a little while for your body to kind of adjust and actually feel like it's had enough of the fuel that it needs. But then you get to a point where it's not just like the cravings are gone. I think that's how, it's like when you're in that place, you think of it that way. It's like, I crave carbohydrates and I'd like for that craving to be gone. But at least for me, it was a situation where this was the first time in my life since being a teenager where I wasn't actually hungry. And this actual recognition that hunger wasn't about like the amount of food in my stomach, like or in the intestines. It's not this feeling of like feeling physically full, because I had been physically full many times, but I was still always looking forward to that next meal, to be able to eat more. I always would have eaten way more if I had given myself the permission to. Obviously there were times where, there was some binging and things like that, but even with the binging, there was no satiation there. When, eating pizza and cookies and donuts, when I was younger and a teenager and kind of would go from restriction to that, some sort of a binge, there's still no actual satiation there. And so when shifting toward, more bioenergetic approach, it was the first time in my life that I actually understood what it was like to not be deeply hungry and to actually be able to eat something and not even be physically full, but feel like I didn't want anymore. And so that was really life-changing for me. And obviously, we see here with Bill, he's like right in the thick of that feeling, which sucks. I want to help him. I want to help him not feel that way. It's not. Yeah, I want to feed him. Definitely bake for him. But and I want to say too, like, it's okay to still have a desire to eat cookies or cake or ice cream. Like, it's not this idea that like you're never going to want to eat those things again. But it's different, right? It's not this physiological need that you're constantly fighting against, and that you're like the food obsession that we see here, and where you're constantly thinking about your next meal. And we see this in extreme circumstances too. We've talked about the Minnesota starvation experiment before, and there's all sorts, if you read through those studies and watch some of the videos and the interviews from the people who did that experiment, where it was basically like 6-month calorie restriction. They were on 1,800 calorie a day diets. And the kinds of things they were doing during that time, the intensity of the food obsession, they were collecting cookbooks and like reading through cookbooks all the time. They, were talking about watching TV and movies, and the only things they were paying attention to was the food and what they were eating. And there's, some of the extreme examples where people started, because they were on a controlled, like strict diet, people would like eat bubble gum, like they were eating gum as like a source of calories because of how hungry they were. There's some people who were like kicked out of the study because they were eating out of like trash cans. So really extreme things that would happen, really extreme measures that our bodies go to try to get refueled. But in any case, we're seeing a slightly less intense version of that here with Bill. But I think this is the product, not just of fasting, but of this restriction mindset, that the way that we lose weight, the way that we're healthy, is just through restriction, just through eating less and not considering all of the factors that affect our health and cause us not to utilize the fuel that's coming in properly. So yeah, I think that's the main things I would want to share here. If you enjoyed that clip, you'll definitely want to download the free Energy Balance Food Guide. The Energy Balance Food Guide will help you determine exactly what to eat to optimally support your metabolism and help you lose weight, improve your digestion, get amazing sleep, boost your energy, and so much more. The food guide makes it extremely easy to get started with a bioenergetic approach to optimizing your health. So head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/guide to download your free Energy Balance Food Guide.